Hello everyone, welcome to Kishore Chess Mentor. We haven't put any videos on the channel for a long time. As today being International Chess Day, I wanted to put a video related to chess. I will try to put in videos more often from here on. And today we are going to talk about something which we used to call it as technique. So when you read some books or when you see some annotated games, at some point in time the annotator stops saying the rest is a matter of technique. So whether technique is something that is kind of basic or it is so easy to understand, and if we ask someone like what is the technique all about, it is quite difficult for them to explain. Okay, so the most important thing is we need to identify certain things. Okay, so even for great grandmasters it is very difficult for them to win a one position. So the most difficult part is to win a one game. So that is the most difficult part. But the thing is, at some point in time people used to say it's a matter of technique. So let us see a game like where it is all about technique. I think like this game might give you the understanding of what technique is all about. Okay, so to start with, this is the position, and the moment we see it, it is king and two pawns and a rook for white, and versus king and rook and a pawn. So white is up by a pawn. We can say that it is up by a material. But how can we win this position? So comparatively, it shouldn't be easy, but let us see. So white plays rook e6 here, and he stops saying like it's a matter of technique. Okay, so the rest is a matter of technique. But when you look at this position, we don't understand. Basically, like there is no change that has happened in the board, right? So what is the technique? So let's see about this position today. The point one is the king has been cut off by a file. So given a check, the king cannot go under the pawn of say f or g files. Okay, it has to cross the file with king d4. This is one option. Okay, and there is one more option, that is rook e5. So basically there are two options. Okay, he has to go with either of them, and we will see like what happens if he plays king d4 as well as like rook e5. So for rook e6, in case if he goes to king d4, the rook has cut off the king by two files. Okay, so that is where it is, and the king cannot go and stop the pawn. So meanwhile what we can do is we can try to create a passer pawn. So we have to create a passer pawn, otherwise like it is quite difficult for us to convert this to a win position, because with just the rook that it is not enough. So pawn here, pawn into king into, and now you have created a passer. So that is the g pawn. So here he will go rook d8, and for this one g4. And the most important part here is the black king has been cut off from the e file. It cannot cross the ocean and start to stop the g pawn. Meanwhile white king is so close to the white pawn, so that like with the help of the white king it can promote to a queen. Let's see like how this happens. King here attacking the rook, and now rook here. Given a chance he will go to rook d1, and then the rook is gone. So now he plays rook here check, king here, rook here, king moves, rook check, king moves, rook check, and now king moves, rook check, king here. So now there are no more checks for white. So what he will do is, that's it. So then he is going to push the g pawn to g6, and then he is going to win the game. So this is for the option of cutting off the king. So this is one technique. And let me come back to the position. Okay, so now rook interpose. So what can we do? Can we take the rook or can we leave it? What shall we do? In case if we play something like f3, then I comes with a check, and then king goes to d4, and then still the rook is not hanging. Okay, the king is supporting the rook. That is one. Okay, can we take the rook or can't we? So here this is kind of an important position wherein like we have to take a decision. So can we take the rook or we need to keep the rook in the board? So here the moment we decide to take the rook, then what happens is king and 2 pawns versus king and a pawn. And usually as a thumb rule, we used to see positions like this saying like, okay, in a pawn ending, if we are having a pawn extra, I think like that must manifest into a win, right? But the problem is when you have very less pawns on the board, meaning like let's say this is the end where we can say like, I mean like we are having a pawn extra, so 2 pawn versus 1 pawn. But the problem here is, can we exchange the pawn? Can we go ahead with say f4? We can certainly go ahead with f4 because after pawn onto king here, and now the black king has to get out, okay, of the support, and once the king moves you can take king into f4. So now you are having a pawn, but the problem is he can take opposition, and we are not having the king before the pawn, so certainly it is not going to be a win for white. So we have seen this position in the past in one of the videos, like I spoke about the opposition. So that is quite an important concept when it comes to king and pawn ending. So here it ended up in a draw. Okay, so how it can end up in a draw? So it can start with pawn here and then king goes, and finally like there is a stalemate. So that is how it goes on. Okay, so having said that, what shall we do? Rook into king into, and from here this gives us an insight that, I mean like we cannot exchange the pawn. We cannot exchange the pawn, meaning because black is taking the opposition, we shouldn't let black take the opposition. That is the technique here. So what shall we do? We shouldn't exchange the pawn. We couldn't play f4 here. We need to wait. We need to wait for the right time to play f4. But this is not the right time certainly. So here he plays king f3. Okay, slowly he is trying to build the position wherein like white will take the position. So here, king here, and now king e2. And the moment we see this is quite an important thing to notice. That is, usually we used to advance, whereas the king is going backwards, right? The whole point of this is he is trying to take the opposition. Okay, king e2, and now king e2, he is paving way for the f pawn to move. And now he plays king e4. So f3 check. This is the most important thing. f3 check, king here. And now what is happening? White has taken the position. This is kind of a subtle difference, but this is the technique that which we need to understand. Again, king takes the position, king moves, and now the king has moved away from the particular g pawn. Okay, so it cannot go ahead and straight away stop it. Pawn here, king here. So there are a couple of things. Either we can take the pawn or we can move the pawn forward. So the point is, the moment we move the pawn forward, it makes f5 pawn as a protected passer. It is being protected by the pawn on g4. So straight away like black king cannot take the f5 pawn. So how can we win from this position? So from here he will come here, and white can go for a walk. Okay, and he doesn't have to afraid about anything because this f5 pawn is completely secured by the g pawn. And the moment the king goes to f4, he is going to push the pawn to f6, and white will go in first. So that is the important thing here. So and then king comes and then king moves, and here black understands that I cannot go so long because I need to stop the f pawn from getting promoted. So here he goes back to e5, and now slowly white king goes on invading. Okay, from here the king goes back, and then you can go ahead and you can take the pawn. Say for example, if king goes here, king go here, king goes here, pawn here, king here, king here, king goes back, you have taken another pawn, and then you are going to win the game with 2 pawns. So this is one. Okay, instead of f5 there is another option, that is f into g5. So here it's a doubled pawn, right? So here it's a doubled pawn, and we need to be cautious about it because like there are chances for stalemate here, and both of them are on the same side. So let us see. Here king goes to f7, king here, king here. So king comes to f4 at the right time. This is the most important thing to notice here. King goes to f7, and in here, let's say for example, in case if king rushes to f4, then I think it is certainly a blunder because king goes to g6, and from here it is attacking the g5 pawn, and white king has to make a move because there are no more pawns. So it has to go away from it, and then king takes pawn. So this is kind of a blunder. So there are a lot of things that to think when you make a move. So till the end, like, you need to be cautious about it. King e4. So he will play king to f4 only when king goes to g6. And now he comes to f4. King has to go back, and now king goes to f5, king to g7, g6. So here in this position, king to h6. So here he is sacrificing the g7 pawn. Okay, so what about this? Why not sacrifice? I mean, like, what about g5? Again, it will end up somewhere like this. Okay, in case you place g5, king goes here. So king comes under the pawn. Okay, and then the king has to move, and then he is going to take this pawn. So it is not going to be a win. It's going to be a draw. Okay, so he makes the right move here. He is sacrificing his pawn to g7. So the black king has to take it. And now this is kind of a familiar position in a position like the king before the pawn. In the king and pawn ending, if the king is before the pawn and if white king has taken the opposition like this, then it is going to be a win. Okay, king here, king here, king here. And black hasn't given up yet. The most important thing is there is something to notice here, that is even black is trying for a trick here. Okay, it is not that it hasn't, the game hasn't over it. So pawn here, king here. In case if he plays say g6 pawn, then king goes back to g8. Okay, and again it is going to be a draw. So now king goes here, king here, and now black is hoping white to push the pawn to g6, and the moment he plays g6, it is going to be a draw. Okay, it is going to be a draw because the black king doesn't have any move to go. So basically here he plays king g6 and saying that, you know what, the king has reached 6th rank, and from here I know how to win this game. Okay, so I think he will go here, 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 and the king has to vacate, and then king here, and you are going to promote the pawn to a queen. Okay, so the basic thing is it starts with the annotator says after rook e6 it's a matter of technique and white wins, but behind the technique there are these many things. So this will be there for most of the positions, but what we need to do is we need to get back to the fundamentals, and we need to see, like, okay, the king has to be pushed off the file. Okay, so meaning like the king cannot come in defense for the white pawn. Okay, and the next thing is he will create a passer pawn and then he will roll it. Okay, so this is what we have seen today, and I will try to put more videos often, and thanks for watching.